What happens when Chicago's most ruthless underworld boss tries to publicly humiliate the only woman brave enough to serve him? He expected her to shatter. Instead, the 260-pound diner waitress made the cold-blooded kingpin drop to his knees. This is a story of curves, cruelty, and unforgiving revenge. The air inside Giovanni's prime always smelled of roasting garlic, expensive cigars, and, on certain Tuesday nights, pure fear. Clara Jenkins was acutely aware of the shift in the room's atmosphere before she even turned around from the espresso machine. The low murmur of wealthy patrons died out, replaced by the clinking of silverware on china and the nervous clearing of throats. Clara didn't need to look to know who had just walked through the brass-handled double doors. It was Dominic Russo. Dominic wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was the undisputed boss of the Russo Syndicate, a man whose legitimate front in real estate barely concealed the blood on his hands. He moved like a predator, silent, composed, and terrifyingly arrogant. Flanked by his two enforcers, a stoic giant named Victor and a twitchy younger man named Leo, Dominic claimed his usual corner booth. It was the booth with its back to the wall and a clear view of every exit. Clara, his poorly dites, the restaurant's balding, chronically sweating manager. He grabbed her thick forearm, his fingers trembling. "They're in your section. Do not look him in the eye. Just take the order, nod, and get back here. Understand?" Clara wiped her hands on her apron. She was 26, stood 5'7", and carried 260 pounds on a frame that made no apologies. Her apron strings dug into the deep curve of her waist, and her thick thighs chafed under her black uniform skirt. She knew how the world saw her: invisible until she was in the way, a punchline for cruel men. But Clara had spent her whole life building an armor thicker than her flesh. "Relax, Paulie," Clara said, her voice a calm, husky drawl. "He puts his pants on one leg at a time like everyone else. He just happens to murder people in his." She grabbed a silver pitcher of ice water and a leather-bound menu, making her way across the dining room. As she approached the booth, the sheer magnetism of Dominic Russo became suffocating. He had pitch-black hair swept back from a sharp, aristocratic face, and eyes the color of bruised steel. He was immaculately dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that clung to broad, muscular shoulders. "Gentlemen," Clara said evenly, setting the water glasses down. "Welcome to Giovanni's. Can I start you off with something from the bar?" Dominic didn't look at the menu. He didn't even look at her face. His cold eyes slowly dragged down her body, taking in the heavy swell of her breasts, the wide flare of her hips, and the undeniable bulk of her silhouette. A sneer curled the corner of his perfectly sculpted mouth. "Victor," Dominic said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that carried just enough to ensure the surrounding tables heard him. "When I pay $10,000 a month for priority seating at this establishment, I expect a certain level of aesthetic grace. Tell me, did they run out of waitresses and hire a parade float?" Leo snorted loudly. Victor smirked, crossing his massive arms. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the adjacent tables. Paulie, watching from the kitchen doors, looked like he was about to pass out. Most women would have flushed, stammered, or burst into tears. Clara had heard worse from high school bullies, but the casual, devastating cruelty of this grown, powerful man ignited a quiet, freezing rage in her chest. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't drop her gaze. She simply tilted the silver pitcher and began pouring ice water into Dominic's glass. She poured until it reached the brim, and then she kept pouring. The freezing water cascaded over the rim, spilling onto the pristine white tablecloth and splashing directly onto the sleeve of Dominic's $3,000 suit jacket. "What the hell are you doing?" Dominic barked, jumping up as the icy water soaked his cuff. Victor's hand instantly flew to the bulge inside his jacket. Clara placed the pitcher down with a loud, definitive clap. "My apologies, Mr. Russo," Clara said, her voice dripping with lethal sweetness. "I thought a man with such a massive ego could handle a little extra volume. Seems you're incredibly fragile." The restaurant went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop, Leo's jaw unhinged. Victor froze, waiting for the order to draw his weapon. Dominic stood there, water dripping from his expensive cuff, staring at the plus-sized waitress who had just openly mocked him in his own territory. The steel in his eyes darkened to a violent storm. He stepped into her personal space, towering over her. Clara tipped her chin up, refusing to retreat a single inch. She could smell his cologne bergamot and expensive leather, mixed with a faint metallic scent of gunpowder. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to, sweetheart?" Dominic whispered, his voice vibrating with menace. "I could have you ground into sausage meat before your shift ends. And then who would bring your steak?" Clara shot back, her heart hammering violently against her ribs, though her face remained a mask of stone. "You want to shoot me over a water spill? Go ahead. But unless you're going to pull the trigger, sit down and tell me how you want your ribeye cooked." "I have other tables." For 5 agonizing seconds, Dominic glared at her. The vein in his neck pulsed. He was a man who demanded the world kneel for him, yet this heavy, unapologetic woman was looking at him like he was a nuisance. Slowly, incredibly, a dark, dangerous chuckle rumbled in Dominic's chest. He sat back down, waving Victor off. "Medium rare," Dominic said softly, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "And if it's overcooked, I won't just complain to the manager. I'll burn this place to the ground with you in it." "Medium rare," Clara wrote on her pad. "Try not to cry if it comes out medium." She turned on her heel and walked away. She could feel his eyes burning into her back with every step, analyzing the heavy sway of her hips. When she pushed through the kitchen doors, her knees finally gave out. She grabbed the stainless steel prep counter, gasping for air. "Are you insane?" Ollie shrieked, grabbing his non-existent hair. "He's going to kill us. He's going to kill all of us." "He's a bully with a trust fund and a gun, Paulie," Clara muttered, trying to steady her shaking hands. But she knew the truth. She had just drawn a target on her own back. When Dominic and his men left 2 hours later, Clara went to clear their table. Sitting under his empty whiskey glass was a brand-new, crisp $100 bill, and written in elegant, sharp cursive on a napkin was a single sentence: "You have a big mouth for a fat girl. I'll enjoy shutting it." The following 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. True to his terrifying reputation, Dominic Russo did not forget the slight. Instead of having Clara quietly disposed of, he decided to make her life a living hell. He became a daily fixture at Giovanni's Prime. He would come in for lunch and demand she serve him. He would casually stretch his legs into the narrow aisles, forcing Clara to squeeze her large frame past him, humiliating her in front of his associates. He made cutting remarks about her diet, asked if the kitchen had enough inventory to feed the guests after she had her shift meal, and tipped her in gym membership brochures instead of cash. Clara lived in a tiny, drafty apartment on 43rd Street, constantly fighting with a landlord named Arthur Pendleton over a broken radiator. She didn't have the luxury of quitting. She needed the tips to pay for her mother's physical therapy in Ohio. So, she swallowed the fear and fought back the only way she knew how, with ironclad defiance. When Dominic left a gym brochure, Clara donated $20 to a local pig rescue under the name Dominic Russo and taped the thank you certificate to his reserved table. When he complained that the booths were too small for someone of her immense gravity, she loudly offered to bring him a booster seat so he could feel bigger. The back and forth became a bizarre, toxic dance. Dominic was infuriated by her refusal to break, yet entirely captivated by it. No one spoke to him this way. Men cowered. Beautiful, slim women threw themselves at his feet, begging for a scrap of his attention. Clara, with her thick arms, wide belly, and sharp tongue, looked at him with nothing but pure disdain. The twisted dynamic violently shattered on a rainy Thursday night. The dinner rush had ended. Clara was wiping down the mahogany bar while Paulie counted the register in the back office. The front door swung open, but it wasn't Dominic. It was the O'Connor brothers. Liam and Sean O'Connor were debt collectors for Declan Gallagher, the brutal head of the Irish mob operating out of the South Side. They were hulking, ugly men with scarred knuckles and a reputation for breaking femurs before asking questions. "Where's Paulie?" Liam barked, his boots leaving muddy tracks on the carpet. Clara immediately felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. He's gone for the night. We're closed. You need to leave. Sean stepped up to the bar, his eyes raking over Clara's body with blatant disgust. Shut up, porkchop. We know he's in the back. Gallagher wants his protection money. Giovanni's is 3 weeks late. Clara gripped the wet rag in her hand. She didn't know Paulie had been paying the Irish mob. This was strictly Russo territory. If Gallagher was moving in on the West Loop, a turf war was brewing. I said, we're closed, Clara repeated, stepping out from behind the bar to block the hallway leading to the office. Liam laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Look at the size of this bitch. Thinks she's a bouncer. He stepped forward and shoved Clara hard in the chest. Clara stumbled backward, her heavy frame colliding violently with a busing station. A tray of glasses shattered on the floor, slicing into her calves. Pain flared, but adrenaline masked it. Don't touch me, Clara snarled, grabbing a heavy glass ketchup bottle from a nearby table. I'll carve you like a Christmas ham, Sean hissed, pulling a serrated hunting knife from his belt and lunging at her. Before Sean could cross the distance, the front door violently shattered inward. Dominic Russo stood in the doorway, his charcoal coat soaked with rain, his face a terrifying mask of predatory rage. Victor and Leo were right behind him, guns already drawn. Drop the knife, Sean, Dominic commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a physical blade. The O'Connor brothers froze. They recognized the apex predator of Chicago. Russo, Liam stammered, raising his hands. This ain't your business. Gallagher claims this joint now. Paulie owes us. Gallagher doesn't claim the dirt on my shoes, Dominic said smoothly, stepping into the dining room. He didn't look at Clara, but his aura was suffocatingly protective. And nobody comes into my city, smashes my tables, and lays a hand on what belongs to me. Clara's jaw tightened. What belongs to me? She wasn't an object, and she certainly wasn't his. Without warning, Dominic moved. For a man in a tailored suit, his speed was demonic. He closed the gap between him and Sean O'Connor in 2 strides. He didn't use a gun. Dominic grabbed Sean's wrist, twisting it until a sickening snap echoed through the room. As Sean screamed, dropping the knife, Dominic drove his knee upward, crushing the Irishman's face with a wet crunch. Sean collapsed, unconscious and bleeding profusely onto the expensive rug. Liam yelled and reached for his jacket, but Victor was already there, pressing the barrel of a silenced pistol hard into Liam's temple. Pick up your garbage, Dominic whispered to Liam, wiping a speck of blood from his cuff. Tell Declan if he sends his mutts into my territory again, I'll mail them back to him in dog food cans. Get out. Liam, trembling, hauled his unconscious brother up by the collar and dragged him out into the rain. The restaurant was silent again, save for the sound of the storm outside. Dominic slowly turned to look at Clara. She was backed against the wall, breathing heavily, a thin trail of blood running down her shin from the shattered glass. Her apron was dirty, her hair a mess. He walked toward her, his dark eyes locked onto hers. The danger radiating from him was palpable. He stopped mere inches away, his chest almost brushing against her heavy breasts. He reached out, his leather-gloved hand gently touching the side of her face. The contrast of his violent hands acting with such startling tenderness sent a confusing electric jolt down Clara's spine. "You're bleeding," he murmured, his thumb brushing over her jawline. "I'm fine," Clara snapped, slapping his hand away. She hated how her voice trembled. "I didn't need your help." Dominic's eyes darkened, the tenderness instantly evaporating, replaced by his trademark towering arrogance. He leaned in, his lips hovering just an inch from her ear. "You were about to be gutted by Irish trash, Clara," he whispered, his voice a dark, velvet threat. "I just saved your life. Most women would be on the floor kissing my shoes right now." He pulled back, looking down at her with that familiar, mocking superiority. "Go on. Kneel for me. Thank me properly." Clara stared at him. She tasted copper in her mouth where she had bitten her lip during the fall. She looked at this beautiful, terrifying man who thought he could buy her dignity with fear. She spat a small drop of blood directly onto his polished Italian leather shoe. "Go to hell, Dominic," Clara said, her voice rock-steady. "I don't kneel for men who have to buy their respect." Dominic looked down at the blood on his shoe and then slowly back up to her face. The silence stretched until it felt like a piano wire pulled taut enough to decapitate them both. He didn't strike her, he didn't yell. Instead, a muscle feathered in his jaw, and a profound, dangerous hunger sparked in the depths of his cold, steel eyes. He stepped back, staring at her as if seeing her for the very first time. "We'll see about that," he promised softly, turning and walking out into the rain. The following Monday, Paulie Dietz was gone. In his place stood a sharply dressed lawyer named Harrison Fletcher, who politely informed the staff of Giovanni's Prime that the establishment had been bought out entirely by Russo Enterprises. Clara's heart plummeted into her stomach. Dominic hadn't just escalated their war, he had bought the battlefield. Yet the torment completely stopped. Dominic no longer tripped her. He no longer left insulting pamphlets. Instead, he simply sat in his corner booth, watching her. His bruised steel eyes tracked every heavy sway of her hips, every confident pivot on her thick legs, and the way she hoisted loaded trays that made the male waiters sweat. The silence was far more unnerving than his insults. It was the calculated patience of a wolf studying a cage he didn't quite know how to unlock. But Clara's defiance had rippled much further than the walls of the restaurant. Declan Gallagher, the ruthless head of the Irish mob, was out for blood. The broken jaw Dominic had gifted Sean O'Connor was an act of war. And Gallagher wasn't a man who fought fair. Word on the street, fueled by the whispers of corrupt city officials like Alderman Stephen Croft, was that the untouchable Dominic Russo had a bizarre, inexplicable blind spot, a fat, loud-mouthed waitress from the West Loop. They decided to hit Dominic where they thought he was weakest. It happened on a freezing Tuesday night. Clara had just unlocked the door to a cramped apartment on 43rd Street, shivering as the draft cut through her cheap winter coat. The hallway was dark, too dark. The overhead bulb had been smashed. Before she could reach for the light switch, a massive hand clamped down over her mouth, tasting of stale tobacco and grease. "Don't make a sound, pig," a gruff voice hissed in her ear. Another man kicked the door shut behind them, plunging the room into shadows. It was Liam O'Connor, accompanied by a hulking enforcer Clara didn't recognize. Panic seized Clara's chest, but she forcefully shoved it down. Years of being targeted for her size had taught her one fundamental truth. She was not small, and she refused to act like it. "Russo's gonna watch us carve you up before we put a bullet in him," Liam sneered, pulling a heavy revolver from his waistband. He shoved her violently toward the center of the living room, expecting her to stumble and fall. He severely underestimated her center of gravity. Clara planted her thick, sturdy legs and absorbed the shove without toppling. Instead of cowering, she used the momentum to spin around, swinging her heavy leather purse like a medieval flail. The solid brass buckle caught Liam dead in the temple with a sickening crack. He dropped the gun, howling in pain as he stumbled backward. The second man lunged at her, wrapping his arms around her wide waist to tackle her to the floor. Clara roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. She threw her entire 260-pound weight backward, crushing the man against the wall. The plaster cracked under the sheer force of the impact, and the air left his lungs in a sharp wheeze. She wasn't a delicate flower to be plucked. She was a boulder rolling downhill. Clara elbowed him viciously in the ribs, but Liam was recovering. He grabbed a heavy floor lamp and swung it hard, striking Clara across the shoulder. Pain exploded down her arm, dropping her to her knees. She gasped, vision swimming as Liam racked the slide of his retrieved pistol, pointing it right at her forehead. "Cute trick, fatty," Liam spat, blood pouring from his temple. "Say goodnight." Bang! Bang! The gunshot deafened Clara, but the pain never came. Instead, Liam's eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed onto her cheap linoleum floor in a lifeless heap. Standing in the doorway was Dominic Russo. His charcoal suit was torn and blood was rapidly soaking through the left side of his crisp white shirt. He had a suppressed pistol in his hand, smoke curling from the barrel. He had been ambushed downstairs, his enforcers nowhere in sight. The second hitman, realizing the boss himself was here, abandoned Clara and charged Dominic with a switchblade. Dominic, weakened by the bullet in his side, raised his gun, but the man tackled him into the narrow hallway. The gun skittered across the floor. The hitman raised the knife, aiming for Dominic's throat. "Hey!" Clara bellowed. She didn't look for a weapon. She became one. Clara charged with explosive speed, hitting the attacker with the full, devastating force of a linebacker. Her shoulder connected with his chest, lifting him entirely off Dominic. They crashed into Clara's notoriously broken cast-iron radiator. The rusty pipe groaned and snapped. Scalding, pressurized water erupted from the fixture, blasting the hitman in the face. He screamed, scrambling blindly toward the door and fleeing down the stairs into the night. The apartment fell dead silent, save for the hissing steam of the broken radiator and the heavy, ragged breathing of two survivors. Clara slowly pushed herself up, her uniform torn, her shoulder throbbing in agony. She looked down at the feared kingpin of Chicago's underworld. Dominic was slumped against the wall, clutching his bleeding side. His skin was deathly pale. The arrogant smirk was completely gone. "You," Dominic rasped, staring at her in absolute shock. "You just saved your mobster ass." Clara finished, grabbing a dish towel to press against his bleeding wound. "Yeah, let's see your skinny supermodels carry your dead weight out of here before the cops arrive." She hauled him to his feet. He was pure, dense muscle, but Clara wrapped her thick arm around his waist, stabilizing him against her own wide, sturdy hips. For the first time in his life, Dominic Russo leaned completely on someone else. Dominic's underground safe house was a sprawling, sterile penthouse in the Gold Coast. Clara had managed to get him into the private elevator just as he passed out from blood loss. Victor and Leo arrived 20 minutes later with an underground doctor, taking over the grim task of digging Gallagher's bullet out of their boss's ribs. Clara sat in the opulent, dimly lit living room, her ruined apron discarded on a $1 million leather sofa. She was exhausted, bruised, and covered in both her own blood and Dominic's. She should have run. She had enough cash in her emergency fund to buy a bus ticket back to Ohio, but a strange magnetic pull kept her anchored to the spot. 2 hours later, the heavy oak doors of the master bedroom clicked open. Dominic stood there. He was bare-chested, heavily bandaged across his torso, wearing only dark slacks. He looked raw, stripped of his sharp suits and intimidating armor. He moved slowly, wincing with every step, until he stood in front of where Clara sat. "The doctor said I lost a lot of blood," Dominic murmured, his gravelly voice softer than she had ever heard it. "He said if you hadn't put pressure on the wound and carried me to the car, I would have bled out on your ugly linoleum floor." "I'll send you a bill for the dry cleaning," Clara said dryly, refusing to break eye contact. "And the radiator." Dominic didn't laugh. He stared down at her, his dark eyes tracing the heavy, unapologetic curves of her body, the thick thighs pressed together on his couch, the soft, wide swell of her stomach, the broad shoulders that had just thrown a grown man across a room. The mockery and disdain that usually danced in his eyes were entirely gone. In their place was something that looked terrifyingly like reverence. "Why did you fight for me, Clara?" he asked quietly. "I've been nothing but a monster to you. I insulted you. I humiliated you, because I am not you," Clara said fiercely, her voice shaking slightly with the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "You think power is about tearing people down. You look at me, and you just see a target because I don't fit into your perfect tailored world. I fought because I don't let bullies win, not Gallagher's men and not you." Dominic stepped closer. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his feverish skin. "I didn't target you because you don't fit in, Clara," Dominic confessed, the words seemingly ripped from his chest against his will. "I targeted you because you're the only real thing I've seen in 10 years. Clara's breath hitched. "Everyone lies to me," Dominic continued, his voice trembling with a dark, desperate intensity. "They bow, they scrape, they agree with whatever I say because they're terrified. But you poured ice water on me. You looked me in the eye and told me to go to hell. Your strength, your resilience, it drove me insane. I wanted to break you just to prove you were like everyone else. But you didn't break, you just grew more beautiful. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. You are a queen, Clara, he whispered, a warrior wrapped in soft curves. And I was too arrogant, too stupid to see it until you were standing over me, fighting my battles. Clara stood up. She was inches away from him, her generous chest brushing against his bandaged ribs. She didn't melt into his confession. She kept her spine steel straight. Words are cheap, Dominic, Clara said, her husky voice laced with authority. You told me once that I had a big mouth for a fat girl. You demanded that I kneel for you. You thought you could break my pride because I wear a bigger dress size. Dominic's jaw tightened. The shame in his eyes was vivid and entirely real. I was wrong, he said flatly. Prove it, Clara challenged. Silence stretched through the massive penthouse, heavy and suffocating. Dominic Rousseau was the king of the Chicago underworld. He answered to no one. He bowed to no one. He commanded legions of violent men and controlled millions in illicit wealth. Dominic looked into Clara's fierce, beautiful eyes. And then, slowly, agonizingly, the Mafia boss began to lower himself. He ignored the searing pain in his wounded side. He sank down until his knees hit the expensive hardwood floor. He was entirely at her feet, looking up at the magnificent, plus-sized woman who had shattered his ego and saved his life. He reached forward, taking her thick, beautiful hands in his own, and pressed his lips reverently against her knuckles. I, Dominic Rousseau, am on my knees, he whispered, staring up at her with complete, unconditional surrender. I am sorry, Clara. I am yours. Command me. Clara looked down at the ruthless kingpin, his pride completely broken and remade in her image. A slow, victorious smile spread across her lips. She gently pulled her hand free, reaching down to cup his cheek. Good boy, Clara murmured. Now get up. We have an Irish mob to dismantle. Did Clara's incredible strength leave you speechless? Sometimes the most powerful queens don't wear a size 0, they wear their curves like unbreakable armor. If you loved watching this arrogant Mafia boss finally drop to his knees and beg for his plus-sized queen, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their fierce worth, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling romance drama.